The studio lights are blinding. The audience is applauding. The theme music of Family Feud is fading out, and Steve Harvey walks towards center stage with that familiar swagger, that million-dollar smile, that presence that fills every corner of the room. He opens his mouth to deliver the first joke of the night, and then he sees him, the contestant standing at the podium on the left side. A young man, maybe 28 or 29 years old, broad shoulders, a nervous smile, hands gripping the buzzer like his life depends on it. Steve Harvey stops mid-step. The cue card in his hand slips through his fingers and floats to the ground. Nobody moves to pick it up. The audience notices something is wrong. The laughter dies. The applause fades into confused murmurs. Steve Harvey is staring at this young man like he has seen a ghost. And in a way, he has. But to understand what happens next, we need to go back. 15 years back. To a winter night in Cleveland, Ohio, when Steve Harvey was not the man he is today. Let me take you there. Cleveland, Ohio. December 2009. Steve Harvey was driving home from a charity event at a local community center. The kind of event he did back then, not because cameras were watching, but because nobody was. His career was rebuilding. His bank account was recovering. His faith was being tested every single day. The streets were covered in snow. The windshield wipers were working overtime. And Steve almost missed him. A boy, maybe 13 or 14 years old, standing at a bus stop with no coat, no gloves, no hat, just a thin hoodie and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Shivering so hard Steve could see it from inside the car. Steve pulled over. He rolled down the window and called out to the boy. Asked him what he was doing out there alone. Asked him where his parents were. Asked him if he needed help. The boy looked at Steve with eyes that were too old for his face. Eyes that had seen things no child should see. Eyes that held no hope, no expectation, no belief that anything good could happen to him. The boy said his name was Marcus. Marcus told Steve he was waiting for a bus that was never going to come. His mother had died 3 months earlier. His father was in prison. He was living with his grandmother, but she was sick, and he had gone out that night to find food because there was nothing left in the house. Steve Harvey sat in that car and felt something crack inside his chest. He got out. He took off his own coat and wrapped it around Marcus. He put the boy in his car and drove him home. When they arrived at the grandmother's house, Steve saw the reality of their situation. No heat, no electricity, a refrigerator that was empty except for a carton of expired milk. Steve stayed for 3 hours that night. He made phone calls. He arranged for groceries to be delivered. He paid for the electricity to be turned back on. He sat with the grandmother, held her hand, and promised her that her grandson would be okay. Before he left, Steve took out his wallet and pulled out a business card. It was old, faded from a time when he was still struggling. He wrote his personal phone number on the back and handed it to Marcus. He said something that Marcus would never forget. Steve said, "Life is going to test you, young man. It's going to push you down so hard you'll think you can't get back up. But you can. You always can. And when you do, when you rise, I want you to call me. Not to thank me, just to let me know you made it." Marcus took that business card. He held it like it was made of gold. And Steve Harvey drove away into the snow, not knowing if he would ever see that boy again. Now let me bring you back to the Family Feud stage. 15 years later, Steve Harvey is standing frozen in front of millions of viewers. The producers are screaming in his earpiece. The audience is confused. The other contestants are looking around, trying to understand what is happening. And Marcus is standing at the podium, looking at Steve with tears already forming in his eyes. Marcus speaks first. He says, "Mr. Harvey, I don't know if you remember me, but you saved my life." The audience gasps. Steve Harvey takes one step forward, then another. He is not following the script anymore. He is not playing a role. He is simply Steve Harvey, a man who is about to be confronted with a piece of his own past that he never expected to see again. Marcus reaches into his pocket and pulls out a business card. It is faded, worn, held together with tape in some places. The edges are soft from being touched thousands of times over the years. The writing on the back is barely visible anymore. But Steve recognizes it immediately. It is his card. The one he gave to a shivering boy on a winter night in Cleveland 15 years ago. Steve Harvey's legs almost give out. Behind the scenes, the producers are in chaos. They're screaming about the schedule, about the sponsors, about the live broadcast. One of them runs toward the stage, trying to signal Steve to continue with the show. But Steve Harvey does something he has never done in his entire career on Family Feud. He takes off his earpiece. He sets it down on the podium. And he walks across the stage toward Marcus. The audience falls completely silent. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a single sound except for Steve Harvey's footsteps echoing through the studio. When Steve reaches Marcus, he does not shake his hand. He wraps his arms around him and holds him. Marcus breaks. The young man who has held himself together for 15 years, who fought through poverty and loss and a system that tried to crush him at every turn, finally lets go. He sobs into Steve Harvey's shoulder like the child he never got to be. And Steve Harvey cries with him. Subscribe and leave a comment right now, because what happens next is something that no one in that studio and no one watching at home ever expected to see. The hug lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes of dead air on a live television broadcast. 4 minutes of a host completely abandoning his role. 4 minutes that cost the network thousands of dollars in advertising revenue. And nobody cared. The audience began to cry. Not just a few people. Everyone. Grown men who came to the show expecting to laugh were wiping tears from their faces. Women were holding each other. Children were watching their parents become emotional and learning something about compassion that no school could ever teach them. When Steve finally pulled back, he kept his hands on Marcus's shoulders. He looked into the young man's eyes and asked him to tell everyone his story. Marcus took a deep breath. He told the audience about that night in Cleveland, about being so cold he could not feel his fingers, about giving up hope that anything would ever change, about a stranger who stopped his car and treated him like he mattered. He told them about keeping the business card in his pocket every single day since then, through high school, through college, through every job interview and every rejection and every moment when he wanted to quit. He told them that he became a social worker, that he now works with at-risk youth in the same neighborhood where Steve found him, that he has helped over 200 children in the last 5 years find housing, education, and hope. He told them that he named his son Steve. The audience erupted, not in applause, in something deeper, in a collective recognition of what human kindness can accomplish when it is given freely, without expectation, without cameras, without reward. Steve Harvey turned to face the audience. His face was still wet with tears. His voice was rough and broken, but his words were clear. He said, "This young man standing next to me is everything I hoped he would become. But I want you to understand something. I did not save his life. He saved his own life. All I did was hand him a coat and a card. He did the rest. Every single day, for 15 years, he made the choice to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing. That is not my victory. That is his." Marcus shook his head. He said, "Mr. Harvey, with all due respect, you're wrong. That coat you gave me kept me warm for one night. But those words you spoke to me kept me warm for 15 years. You told me I could rise. And every time I fell, I heard your voice telling me to get back up." Steve Harvey had to turn away. He walked to the edge of the stage and stood there for a moment, his back to the audience, his shoulders shaking. The cameras stayed on him. Nobody told them to cut away. Nobody wanted to miss this. When Steve turned around again, he had made a decision. He walked back to the center of the stage and addressed the audience directly. He said, "We're going to do something different tonight. We're not going to play the game. We're going to talk. I want everyone here to understand that the person sitting next to you, the stranger you've never met, might be carrying a weight you cannot imagine. And a single act of kindness, a moment of your time, a word of encouragement could change their entire life." The producers had given up trying to stop him. Steve invited Marcus to bring his family onto the stage. His grandmother was there. The same woman Steve had sat with 15 years ago, now in her 80s, frail but alive. Alive because Marcus had fought to keep her alive. Alive because Steve Harvey's intervention had given them both a chance. Steve knelt down beside her wheelchair. He took her hands in his, and he thanked her. He thanked her for raising a boy who became a man who became a hero to hundreds of children. He thanked her for surviving, for holding on, for believing in her grandson when the world gave them every reason to give up. The grandmother looked at Steve with eyes that still held the same quiet strength she had shown him 15 years ago. She said, "Mr. Harvey, I prayed for you every night since that winter. Not because of what you gave us, because of who you are. I prayed that God would bless you for having a heart big enough to stop for strangers." Steve Harvey lost his composure completely. He buried his face in his hands and wept. The audience rose to their feet, not because anyone told them to, not because the applause sign was lit. They rose because they were witnessing something true, something rare, something that reminded them why human beings are capable of greatness. Share and subscribe right now. Make sure this story is never forgotten, because what happens in the final moments of this broadcast changed Steve Harvey's life forever. After the show ended, Steve Harvey did not go to his dressing room. He sat on the edge of the stage, alone, holding that faded business card in his hands. The card that had traveled 15 years through poverty, through struggle, through triumph, back to the man who had written on it. A production assistant approached him carefully, not wanting to disturb the moment. She asked Steve if he was okay. Steve looked at her and smiled. He said, "I've been doing this job for a long time. I made millions of people laugh. I won awards. I've built a career that most people dream about. But tonight, for the first time, I understood why any of it matters." He held up the business card. He said, "This card was worthless. Faded ink on cheap paper, but carried a promise. And that promise was kept. Not by me. By him. By Marcus. He kept the promise I made to myself when I was young and broke and sleeping in my car. The promise that if I ever made it, I would reach back and help someone else." Steve Harvey kept that business card. He had it framed and placed it on his desk in his office, where it remains to this day. Not as a reminder of what he did, as a reminder of what is possible when human beings choose to see each other. Marcus continued his work with at-risk youth. The publicity from the Family Feud episode brought attention and funding to his organization. Within 2 years, they had expanded to 3 additional cities. Within 5 years, they had helped over 1,000 children find stability and hope. Marcus and Steve stay in touch. They talk on the phone at least once a month. Steve has visited Marcus's center multiple times. He has met the children Marcus works with. He has told them the same thing he told Marcus on that winter night in Cleveland. You can rise. You will rise. And when you do, reach back and help someone else. The business card became a symbol. Marcus had copies made and started giving them to the children he works with. Each card carries the same message Steve wrote on the back 15 years ago. Each card is a promise. A promise that someone believes in them. A promise that their story is not over. A promise that kindness ripples outward in ways we cannot predict or measure. Steve Harvey has spoken about that night on Family Feud in numerous interviews since then. He calls it the most important moment of his career. Not because of the ratings, not because of the viral attention, because it reminded him that fame and success are meaningless without connection, without service, without love. In one interview, Steve said something that has become his guiding philosophy. He said, "I've been blessed beyond anything I deserve. But blessing is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be shared. Every single one of us has the power to change someone's life. Not with money, not with fame, with presence, with attention, with the simple act of stopping and saying, 'I see you. You matter.'" Marcus is now 34 years old. His son Steve is 9. Every night, before bed, Marcus tells his son a story. The same story. The story of a winter night in Cleveland when a stranger stopped his car and changed everything. The boy knows the story by heart, but he asks to hear it again and again. Because the story is not about Steve Harvey. The story is about hope. The story is about the power of one moment, one choice, one act of grace that echoes through generations. And the story is not over. It continues every time Marcus hands a business card to a struggling child and says the words Steve Harvey said to him. You can rise. 3 words. 15 years. Thousands of lives. One business card. That is the legacy of what happened on the Family Feud stage. That is the legacy of Steve Harvey. And that is the legacy that each of us can create if we choose to stop, to see, to care. The studio is dark now. The audience has gone home. The cameras are off. But somewhere in Cleveland, a child is holding a business card with a phone number written on the back. And somewhere in that child's heart, a spark of hope is beginning to glow. Because someone stopped. Because someone cared. Because kindness, true kindness, is never wasted. It echoes forever.